The evening in New York was cool and damp. The narrow streets of Manhattan glistened under the streetlights, the wet asphalt reflecting the flicker of neon signs. People hurried by, hiding under umbrellas, getting lost in the crowd. Jeff Bezos stood by the entrance of a small restaurant at the intersection. It was an old-fashioned place with red and white curtains on the windows and a sign with faintly glowing letters, Tom's Diner. Jeff was dressed in simple jeans and a black t-shirt. His face was concealed behind dark sunglasses, and a baseball cap sat low on his forehead. He looked like an ordinary middle-aged man looking for a quick meal. None of the passers-by suspected that one of the richest men in the world was standing before them. He entered the restaurant, and the bell above the door softly rang. Inside, it was warm, smelling of fried bacon and fresh coffee. The small dining area was almost full. A young waitress with long chestnut hair, wearing a name tag that read Sarah, approached him with a strained smile. Her eyes looked tired, but her voice was friendly. "Welcome. What would you like to order?" "A cup of coffee and a turkey sandwich," Jeff replied, sitting down at an empty table by the window. Sarah took the order and quickly headed to the kitchen. Jeff looked around. Behind the bar stood a burly man in a white apron. His face was stern, and his eyes were cold. He was the restaurant manager. His name tag read Tony. A shout came from the kitchen. "Sarah, where's the order? Hurry up. People are waiting." Sarah flinched and nodded. She returned to Jeff's table with a cup of coffee, which she placed with a soft clink on the table. "Sorry for the delay," she said quietly. "It's okay," Jeff replied with a slight smile. He took a sip of coffee. It was warm but slightly bitter. His gaze stopped on a couple at the neighboring table, an elderly man and his wife glaring at their empty plates. "We've been waiting for 20 minutes. The man exclaimed. "Sorry, I'll be right there," Sarah began, but Tony abruptly interrupted her. "They'll wait. You're not the only one working." "But—" "No buts. Work faster, Sarah," he shouted. Jeff slowly placed the cup back on the table, his jaw tightening. He noticed how Sarah's hands trembled as she turned away. She was clearly exhausted. Jeff looked again at Tony, who had turned back to the kitchen, muttering to himself. A few minutes later, Sarah brought the sandwich and apologized again. "I really apologize for the wait." "Sarah, you're doing fine," Jeff said quietly, making eye contact with her. Her eyes welled up, and she barely nodded. Suddenly, the kitchen door swung open, and Tony came out into the dining area. He looked irritated. His eyes landed on Jeff, who was eating his sandwich. Tony approached him, arms crossed over his chest. "Excuse me, sir, but this table is reserved." Jeff slowly lifted his gaze. "I don't see any reservation sign. This is my place. I make the rules," Tony replied coldly. "If this is your place, why is it such a mess?" Jeff raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." Tony's voice tightened. "People have been waiting for their orders for over 20 minutes. The staff is working themselves to exhaustion, and you're yelling at the waitstaff instead of helping. Is this how you run a restaurant?" Tony's eyes narrowed. "If you don't like it, the door's right there." Jeff put the sandwich down and stood up. "No, I'm not leaving." "You will leave immediately," Tony shouted, grabbing Jeff by the arm. Sarah gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. The other patrons froze, turning their heads toward the conflict. Jeff slowly removed Tony's hand from his arm. "You just made a big mistake." "Oh, really? What are you going to do about it?" Tony sneered. Jeff leaned closer and coldly whispered, "We'll see." Tony smirked dismissively. "Get out of here before I call the police." Jeff casually nodded, tossing a few bills on the table. Then he took out his phone and said, "Sarah, how long have you been working here?" "Half a year," she whispered. "And the other waitstaff?" "People can't last more than a month because of Tony," she said quietly. Jeff pressed a few buttons on his phone and said, "Let's see how long he lasts here." "What are you typing?" Tony asked suspiciously. Jeff looked up. Nothing important. Just calling someone to get this place in order. Tony gave him a distrustful glance. And who are you? Jeff took off his sunglasses, and Tony's face showed surprise. Jeff Bezos. Jeff looked at him coldly. Exactly. And now, we're going to make some changes. Jeff Bezos silently stared at the manager, who once again crossed his arms and sneered. So, are you going to complain somewhere now? He mocked. Maybe leave a review on Google? He took a step toward Bezos, his smile growing even more contemptuous. Are you trying to tell me how to run this place? Who do you think you are? Jeff slowly lifted his gaze. His eyes narrowed, and his expression became cold and firm. The one who can shut this restaurant down overnight, he replied in a steady tone. The manager's mouth twitched, but he quickly regained his composure. Oh, really? He laughed. And how are you going to do that? Call your friends. Jeff slowly raised his phone and opened an app with the Amazon logo. Listen carefully, he said calmly. This place was bought by one of Amazon's subsidiaries last year. I know that because I personally signed the papers. I have the authority to suspend any business operating under our umbrella. The room went silent. The manager appeared momentarily confused, but quickly regained control. You're just lying, he replied coldly. If that were true, you'd have done something by now. Jeff took a few steps toward him, his eyes narrowing. You have exactly 1 minute to apologize to Megan and bring her back to work. Otherwise, I'll press one button, and tomorrow you'll be looking for a new job. The manager nervously laughed, but there was a shadow of fear in his eyes. This is some kind of game, he hissed. You think I'll fall for this? Without a word, Jeff raised his finger toward the button on his phone screen. 50 seconds. The manager took a step back. This is a joke, he muttered, but his voice no longer sounded confident. 40 seconds. Panic appeared in the manager's eyes. He glanced at the employees, who were watching the scene with concern. 30 seconds. All right, the manager shouted, raising his hands. Okay. Apology accepted. No. Jeff shook his head. Apologize to her, not to me. The manager turned to Megan, who was still standing in the corner, her hands clenched into fists. She looked like she was about to cry, but was holding herself together. The manager reluctantly gritted his teeth. I'm sorry, Megan. It was a mistake. You can come back to work. Megan looked up, surprised. Seriously? Seriously, the manager muttered, staring at the floor. Jeff watched the scene closely, his gaze never leaving the manager. And now, go up to her and shake her hand, he added quietly. What? Shake her hand to show you're really sorry. The manager nervously walked over to Megan and extended his hand. She hesitated for a moment before shaking it. It's okay, she said quietly. Jeff crossed his arms and nodded. Good job, he said coldly. Now you can return to your duties. The manager returned to the counter, still looking humiliated. Jeff took a few steps toward Megan. Are you okay? Yeah. She still looked shocked. Is this real? Who are you? He smiled. I'm just a customer who didn't like the service, he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. Megan looked at him, still not believing her eyes. Thank you. Jeff gently touched her shoulder. Just do your job. And if anyone else tries to put you down, tell them you've got connections this time. He turned and walked toward the door. Wait, Megan called. Jeff stopped for a moment. What's wrong? I know who you are. Her eyes were sparkling. And I'm grateful for this. Jeff smiled. Just don't let people treat you like garbage, Megan. He walked away, leaving her on the sidewalk with a hot coffee in her hands and a surprised smile on her face. A few days later, Jeff returned to the restaurant, but this time, everything was different. The entrance doors swung open, and Jeff walked in without paying attention to the curious glances directed at him. He immediately noticed that the atmosphere was different. There was none of the easygoing vibe he had seen before. The same employees were standing behind the counter, but now they were less friendly, and even the manager was standing in the corner, nervously checking the time. Jeff walked up to the counter. "You forgot something," he said, looking at the manager, whose expression changed instantly. The manager tried to hide his panic, but it was obvious. "I don't understand what you mean," he replied, trying to remain calm. "You know why I'm here," Jeff said, without raising his voice. "You probably forgot that I was promised I wouldn't see situations like this again." The manager lost his composure. I don't understand what you're talking about." Jeff leaned in and whispered, "I told you I'm not alone, right? If you think this is something you can just forget, I'll show you how things really work." The manager nervously shrugged his shoulders as Jeff took out his phone and began searching for something on the screen. Jeff didn't give him time to explain. "You're not just offending people. You're violating the principles under which this network operates. If I see you treating anyone like this again, it will be the end for you. Do you understand?" The manager tilted his head and nodded silently. "Yes, I understand." Jeff paused, giving the situation time to settle. "And if you offend any of my friends again, I won't be so lenient," he added, chuckling softly. At that moment, the door opened again, and Megan entered the restaurant. She immediately sensed the tension in the air. Jeff and the manager locked eyes again, but now there was fear in the manager's eyes. "Megan," Jeff said, turning to her, "do you have a problem with this guy?" Megan looked at the manager and nodded. "Yes, he's the same guy who tried to humiliate me a few days ago." The manager scowled. "You talk too much," he muttered, casting a glance at Megan. Jeff stepped forward, and the tension in the atmosphere grew even thicker. "You probably think this is all going to end," he said, looking at the manager. "But I haven't said everything yet. I'm not going to let people like you go without consequences. You're in danger now, but not from me, from yourself." The manager stared at Jeff, confused. His jaw clenched, and his eyes were filled with irritation and fear. "I don't understand," he muttered. "You won't understand until it's too late," Jeff replied, slowly stepping away from the counter. Megan stood by, watching the scene with a brief pause. Her gaze was full of doubt, but she was starting to realize that this wasn't just some conversation or manipulation. She saw how Jeff acted fearlessly, as if he had real power. "Jeff," she spoke to him again, "what are you going to do next?" Jeff turned back to her. His voice became serious and cold. "I'm not going to let him go without consequences," he said. "And even if it takes longer, we'll finish what we started." The manager became openly nervous. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, practically in panic. "Because you're weak," Jeff replied. "And I don't like weak people in leadership positions." The manager tried to say something, but Jeff had already left, leaving him standing in silence, realizing that this time he wouldn't escape responsibility. The next day, the situation escalated even further. Jeff didn't expect things to start so quickly, but just a few hours after his conversation with the manager, he received a call. It was Megan. Her voice sounded tense, almost frightened. "Jeff, you won't believe what happened. He tried to do something again." "Who?" Jeff asked, feeling his heart race. "The manager. Apparently, he contacted some people and said I was trying to use you. And now all the colleagues are starting to look at me like I'm some dirty person. He wants me to quit." Jeff paused for a moment. He knew the situation was starting to get out of hand, but he hadn't expected it to escalate so quickly. "They don't know who they're dealing with," he said, his voice turning cold and determined. "You'll keep working, and they'll understand that. Now you see why I warned you." "But what do we do next?" Megan asked, her voice still nervous. "Now it's not just about you. Now it's about me, and I'm going to show them that they can't just walk all over people like they want," Jeff replied. "We'll make him understand that we can't just be ignored." Jeff glanced at his phone and found the number of one of his old acquaintances, a lawyer who worked in corporate law. He knew that such conflicts could be resolved legally, but it was crucial to act quickly. Meanwhile, at the restaurant where it all began, the atmosphere was becoming increasingly tense. The manager began to feel the pressure and cross boundaries. He was not only trying to assert his authority in front of the team, but also subtly influencing some employees to start doubting Jeff and Megan. He sensed that it was becoming hard to keep control, and even felt how more and more people were distancing themselves from him. One evening, he met with a few of his old acquaintances who worked at other restaurants. This was his chance to find support. But as soon as he told them about the situation, they responded with a dead silence. One of them, struggling to find the words, said, "Don't you understand what you've done? This guy, Jeff, he's not just anyone. He's not going to leave you alone." The manager felt his face flush with anger, but he couldn't admit his weakness. He decided that the real threat wasn't Jeff himself, but the growing dissatisfaction among his colleagues and the feeling that he was losing control of the situation. And then, a few days later, Jeff decided to act decisively. He invited Megan and a few of her colleagues to the restaurant for an informal meeting, where they could discuss everything calmly. She arrived, and along with a few other employees, they sat at a large table in the corner of the restaurant, where no one could overhear them. Jeff placed his hand on the table and looked at each of them. "I know things aren't easy for you right now," he began, "but you need to understand, you're part of what's happening, and if you stay on the side of these people, you'll face consequences too." Megan leaned toward him, her face tense again. "Are you sure this is the right way? I'm afraid it might make the situation even worse for all of us." "I'm sure," Jeff replied, his voice calm but heavy with determination. "We're doing this now. And if anyone tries to stand in our way, I'll show them who really holds the power here. We're not just here for nothing. This will be our last chance. If we haven't acted before, now is the time we need to stand together." And at that moment, they realized either they would give in to the pressure and lose, or they would stop the chain and take control into their own hands. Jeff watched those sitting at the table and felt the tension in the air rise. Each of them was on the edge, between fear and hope, between the desire to give in and the readiness to fight. He understood that this was the moment when they could change their lives and the lives of others around them. "Megan," he said, "you know what we can do? You and everyone else sitting here now need to decide if you want to be part of something bigger than just surviving in this world." Megan looked at him with a slight doubt, but also with a sense of understanding. "It's not just about us," she quietly replied. "It's about the future of all the employees here. If we do this, we'll show everyone that there's another way." Jeff nodded, and a sense of calm appeared in his gaze, as if he saw something the others didn't. Now he felt that he wasn't alone in his beliefs. The situation had become more than just a fight for one employee. It had become a fight for principles, for how people should treat one another in society. A few days later, everything changed. Jeff reached out to senior officials of the restaurant chain and reported the situation. He didn't wait for things to spiral out of control. And although he knew this could have unforeseen consequences for his own business, he decided to take the risk. His resolve was uncompromising. The manager, who had caused all the problems, was fired that very day. Colleagues began to express their support for Megan, and together they felt the power of unity. Even when Jeff left the restaurant after the issue had been resolved, he saw how the staff began to work with renewed energy. Everyone became more open with each other. The atmosphere in the establishment changed. The tension that had once been so thick was gone. Megan and the rest of the employees began to feel safe, and their voices were being heard. Jeff realized that even the smallest, seemingly insignificant step could lead to significant changes if taken with determination and understanding. That evening, sitting in his office, Jeff looked out the window at the quiet city. The moon hung in the sky, and the streets, though still in shadow, didn't seem as dark as before. It seemed that the world could change, even if it started with a small step. He already knew that his decision had changed more than just one restaurant. He had proven to himself that right actions, even in the face of harsh competition and difficulties, could truly change people. And although the future remained uncertain, he was now sure, even in the most challenging situations, there's always a chance for change. The final words that stayed with him were simple but profound. If you want to change the world, start by changing your reaction to what's happening around you. Sometimes it's quiet confidence in your actions that can change everything. And even when this story ended, a new path was just beginning. A few weeks after all the changes, the restaurant where the battle had started was thriving. Jeff saw how the atmosphere within the team had transformed. People began to treat each other with respect, and their interactions became more open and collaborative. Megan, who had once been exhausted and humiliated, now began to feel like an important part of the team. Her eyes were no longer tired, and her smile had become genuine. One of his employees, Connor, approached Jeff after work. His words carried a tender gratitude that Jeff couldn't ignore. "Thank you for everything," Connor said. "You've changed everything, not just for us, but for everyone working here. The sense of change you brought is more than just giving chances. You gave us a voice." Jeff nodded, realizing how important it was to be attuned to the needs of others. In that moment, he understood that his business and his impact on it were not limited to numbers and profits. It was about people, how they work together, support each other, and take the right steps for one another. The next day, when Jeff returned to his office, he received a call from one of his partners. "Jeff, I heard about what happened in your restaurant. It's impressive. You really changed the situation. And what you did hasn't gone unnoticed. Can we talk about expanding this approach to other branches?" This was an opportunity Jeff couldn't ignore. But this time, he didn't feel any pressure. He realized that he had made the right decision not for the sake of fame or big profits, but out of a desire to make the world better, even in something as simple as the restaurant business. "Of course, let's discuss it," he replied, feeling confident in his words. The final moment. A few months later, after several changes across the network of restaurants, Jeff knew that the decisions he had made during that incident had become more than just a business strategy. They had become an example for others, because even in the toughest situations, it's worth sticking to the principles of respect and humanity. And though the path to change hadn't been easy, he was ready to keep walking it, knowing that even a small step could lead to huge changes in people's hearts. The story ended, but it left Jeff with the feeling that this was just the beginning of deeper changes, changes that could affect an entire community.